Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Look at comedy of errors here.
There we go.
I put some water right here for you.
Thank you.
If you want any more, let me know.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. My name is June. I'm an alcoholic. Hi. I want to thank Shirley and Christine and the committee for inviting me and allowing me to be a part of this. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. It has given me a life I never would have wanted. And it has made me a person I wouldn't have even liked when I came here. This was the first convention that I ever attended. It was in Bakersfield. I was less than 90 days sober when I went. A bunch of people in my home group, the Monday Night Venice group, which was a very active group, filled up a car with more people than seatbelts because people weren't wearing them then, and probably wouldn't now anyway if that was the same group. But anyway, we drove to Bakersfield. I had grown up in Venice. We never even had a car, and I had run away once while I was drinking, hitchhiking, and I had made it 5 miles east to Culver City. And that was pretty much the extent of my travels before I got sober. And I got out to Bakersfield, and I remember sitting on the floor in one of those hallways in the convention center in Bakersfield, and there really were thousands of people talking to one another and hugging and doing whatever. And I just sat on the floor in a corner. And I got not assigned, but somebody made me sit at the desk helping with registration because I didn't have enough money for a badge. And so I kind of worked for a while, and then they gave me a badge. And I remember I got to go to I went to a number of the meetings. I know I didn't go to the banquet, but I went to the Sunday morning meeting. And I remember that woman, and I remember just being at that convention. And you know, I'm one of those people, I've thought about this a lot more and more the last couple of years. I am a person I'm very grateful to the speaker meetings that I've attended over the years in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because for me, it was really where I was able to hear the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. I do believe in that phrase that we often use or people refer to of the language of the heart. Because when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't want anybody to touch me. I didn't want anybody to talk to me. I certainly didn't want anybody to hug me. I didn't want to have anything to do with any of you. And the only thing, that I hated more than all of you was me. And yet, those people that stood at podiums when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous, I believed some of the things that they were sharing about. I believed that they knew what pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization was like. I believed that some of those people had hated themselves and that alcoholism had taken them to a place that they just couldn't believe where they were living. And I believed that their life got better after they came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I did not believe that my life would ever get good. I didn't believe Alcoholics Anonymous would make that possible, but I thought it might get a little less painful. And it was those members of Alcoholics Anonymous that showed up and drove long distances and stood up at podiums. And a lot of times I don't even remember anything that they said. I do, though, remember sometimes when they made me laugh, and I had not laughed in a long, long time, And And for me this weekend, it means so much that Cliff and Pat are here. You know, it's meant so much that they've been a part of my life. And they have been a huge part of my life. And, you know, I'm going to jump all around. But I want to tell you something that happened maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I was having a really hard day. And I was over 30 years sober. And I was having a hard day. And I was at the beach. And the ocean for me has consistently been my higher power. I don't mean any disrespect to anyone else who has anything more different than that, but it has worked for me. And I was at the ocean and I was sitting there and I really felt at a loss for a direction in my life. I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to kill myself. But I felt very much like my life was at a flat line and was going to stay that way. And I called Cliff as I sat on the beach that day and I said, Cliff, I don't have a 5-year plan. Do you know what I mean? I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what to be doing next. I don't know what's happening. And Cliff said, well, why don't you go to a meeting? And Sunday afternoon is my home group, the Sunday Noon Ohio Street. And I think I said to Cliff, but I know I thought, you know, for crying out loud, you know, after 30 years, I mean, shouldn't we have a little more that we can fall back on? I mean, could there be, could we have a little more depth here to what we could, maybe read something, maybe, something. I mean, come on, And I went to the meeting that day, and after the meeting, I felt better. And everything didn't change, and it wasn't magic, which would be nice. And I know that that happens sometimes for people. But it was a reminder to me, and it has been so important. I was thinking about it this morning, how important it has been and continues to be for me, even over 30 years sober, that I remember that those basic things that were important to me in my first 30 days are still the things that make the difference for me today. And what I want to mention is as I think about it over the years that I have been sober, there have been just a couple of things that have really, really been important. I was listening to a speaker, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years ago. I was listening to this speaker on a tape. That's back when they had tapes, but anyway. So I was listening to this tape, and I didn't know this person, but they were, I was really enjoying their talk, and they were talking about different things and telling some different stories. And he said, if I had to boil down everything that I have learned in Alcoholics Anonymous and tell you the one thing that has to do with the fact that I have been able to maintain and achieve long-time sobriety in alcoholics. If I had to tell you what it is, the one thing that's the important thing that you have got to do if you want to stay sober, and if you're going to stay sober, the one thing, and I'm listening, just in case I haven't been doing it, I want to throw it in to the repertoire here. And he said, I'd have to say it's been not drinking. And at the end of the day, I want to tell you that what I was taught when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was what has remained important to me throughout my years in sobriety, is that we don't drink no matter what. And then we show up, when I was listening, to what was going on with Larry and, and the flyer and, these different things, I got very active after I came to this first convention here. I got very active after Alcoholics Anonymous. I truly believe that that would be the single thing that has changed my life, is the service and the traditions and the things that I learned from active in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got on the committee for this conference. I met a lot of the people that I admire and love the most in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had a lot of fun. I got to see what Pat talked about yesterday when she talked about being at a business meeting in Al-Anon and seeing fighting and arguing and hostility, and yet at the end of it, that principles before personalities took over and the group conscience carried the day. And I saw it happen over and over and over again. And I was led from working on these convention committees, I got led into general service. And what I thought of this morning when I was watching Larry, when I was a few years sober, I'm thinking maybe I was 7 years sober, I'm not sure. I was elected treasurer of the Southern California Assembly area. Now, those of you who've been involved in general service or been around a while probably know that's a huge area. There are just thousands and thousands of meetings in the Southern California Assembly area, and they elected me treasurer. Now, at that time in my life, I had never even had a bank account. I've been to 18 grammar schools, 7 junior highs, 5 high schools. I only finished 7th grade, and that's how it was that day, too, when they elected me. And they elected me this, and I had no idea what I was doing. You know, there's no training, as I'm sure those of you who have been involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. You just do things, you know, but there's no training. And so I went to the post office box, and it was kind of like Santa. I took these sacks and just things, you know, just lots and lots of mail, you know, and I brought them all home. And I just opened all these envelopes, and you know, there were checks, you know, a check for 75 cents, you know, a check for $1.50, a check for $5 from the bigger groups, you know. And I'm supposed to write a receipt. They'd given me a receipt book, so I figured that out. So every check I got, I wrote a receipt, and then I put it in a pile, because you have to mail the group the receipt. And as I did all of that, and I don't know, but I'm sure there were hundreds, really, of checks. I did all of that, and then I mailed them all back, and when I finished, I realized by the time the next assembly meeting had come that not only did I mail everyone their receipts, I mailed them their checks back with them. And so I had to stand at the podium and say, "Hi, I'm your new treasurer, and could you please send the checks back?" I didn't really know, you know. And Dick Sutherland, a former chair of this conference from Bakersfield, who was delegate then, he introduced me to a guy named John Edwards, a wonderful member of Alcoholics Anonymous, very quiet member of Alcoholics Anonymous, who'd been an accountant at Arco before he retired. And he and his wife would have me come over, and we would open all the checks, and they taught me how you fill things out and stamp things and, you know, and all of these things. And I was thinking about this recently because I was thinking, you know, I was not the right man or person for the job. I wasn't. They really should have elected John Edwards. Do you know what I mean? He was trained, a professional. I mean, he knew what the heck, you know, but that's just not the way we do it in Alcoholics Anonymous, you know? And I don't know how these things turn out. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and I want to tell you a little bit about what it suggests that we do in the book, a little bit about what I used to be like, what happened, what it's like today for me, what I'm like. But I want to start out, I want to welcome anyone who's new, and I know there are some of you. I saw you stand up. I want to welcome anyone who it's your first convention. I want to encourage you to get involved in, you know, in conventions. It's been wonderful for me. You know, I'm the kind of person where a lot of times I don't just need a meeting, I need a convention, you know, and I'm really grateful that Alcoholics Anonymous in California has a lot of those. I've been very lucky because I found a lot of enthusiasm and fun there. But what I want to start out by saying is the things that I try to say anytime I'm asked to speak in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, because they're the most important things I'll say all morning. And I start out by saying them because I want to say them because they're important. I want to start out by saying them, and in case anybody in here is like me and has a very short attention span, you won't have to listen to the rest of what I say, but I'd like you to hear this. I am not an expert on Alcoholics Anonymous, on alcoholism, or on anything else. I'm just a member. I'm going to stand up here. I'll share a little bit about my experience. I'll share some of the things that have meant a lot to me. You know, but I want to encourage you to go to lots and lots of meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, because you know, we're people who normally would not mix, and I believe that's one of the greatest things about Alcoholics Anonymous. I also want to mention, because these days and for a while now, people come to Alcoholics Anonymous in all different kinds of ways. I don't think it matters how anybody gets to Alcoholics Anonymous. But because they come in different ways, and because sometimes some of the ways that they are brought here involved them paying money in some respect or another, I want to be very clear about one thing. Alcoholics Anonymous is absolutely free. Had it not been free, I never could have come here. Had it not remained free, I could not have stayed. I was over 10 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous before I could put $1 in the basket. So this is not about money, and I'm really, really grateful. That's been really important for me over the years, and I want to make sure you know that if you're new, that this isn't about money. And as I mentioned when I said that I came to this conference and I could not afford the badge, I worked at the desk for a couple of hours and they gave me a badge so that I could attend meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I did that most of the 10 years. I went to lots and lots of different events in AA. I never had the money for a ticket, and I worked and I set up chairs, or I did whatever I could, or somebody gave me a ticket. That's just the way that it was, you know. Anyway. I am a person who believes that I was born an alcoholic. And I believe that because there was something wrong with me before I ever entered alcohol, into my body. I'm extremely grateful that Alcoholics Anonymous exists in a time that I was born. Alcoholics Anonymous did not exist when my grandfather was killed. He was the drunk driver in a car accident, and he and all the people in the car were killed. Alcoholics Anonymous did not exist when my father was born, and my father was also to drink himself to death alone in a hotel room. My mother is also an alcoholic. And so in my life, there's been a lot of alcoholism for generations going on. I grew up in a home with a lot of violence, a lot of broken promises, a lot of different kinds of abuse and the things that sometimes happen in alcoholic families. I didn't know it was alcoholism. I didn't know what it was. But my first answer in life was not alcohol. And this is, again, if you're new, this is why I'd like to encourage you to go to lots of meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, is because I'm not a spokesperson for Alcoholics Anonymous or for our story. This is just mine. But my first answer in life was suicide. And I began from the time that I was 5 years old to try and kill myself on a regular basis. I began to cut my hands and fingers and wrists with razors. I began to take overdoses of baby aspirin, which was all I had at that time. I began to beat my face and body with hammers and to burn myself and to do anything that I could to hurt myself. I really don't believe that there were any days before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous in my life that I didn't try and take my own life, pray to a God that I was slowly losing faith in to please let me die or put myself in a position where someone else would take my life. I wanted out. And I look back on it over the years, and I can certainly see that some of my suicide attempts were to try and get attention or to try and do something. But by and large, I have to tell you, up to and including today, as I look back, I wanted out. I wanted to die. I didn't want to be here. There wasn't anything in life that you could tell me about that I wanted to hang around for, because it all always hurt way too much. And you either know what I'm talking about or you don't. It just always hurt. And so for someone like me, I am extremely grateful that alcohol worked its magic. I began to drink on a regular basis from the time that I was 8 years old. I had already been using some different chemicals for about a year by then. By the time I was 9, I found a combination that I never altered in any way. It was sleeping pills or barbiturates and alcohol. The combination of those got me exactly where I wanted to go, and that was out. I just wanted to not hurt. I wanted to not feel. I wanted to not care. And alcohol worked that way for me, and I'm very, very grateful that it did. In growing up in my home and in my area in Venice Beach, in an alcoholic home, I was kind of an observer of people. I'm an only child. I looked around and I saw men and women, and I saw them live with life and handle situations in completely different ways. I never saw a man cry, ever, in my life before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I've seen men shot. I've seen them stabbed. I've seen them arrested. I saw their wives leave them. I saw their kids overdose. I saw a lot of things happen. I never saw a man cry. And I thought that meant that men never hurt. I saw the women in my life walk through those same situations, and I saw most of them have a breaking point. And I looked at those two different groups of people, and I decided immediately which one I wanted to be like. And I spent my whole life trying to be what I thought a man was, someone who cared about no one, someone who felt absolutely nothing with the exception of anger and rage. The problem with that was that I was one of those people, sort of like Jeff talked about last night, that was extremely sensitive, so that absolute strangers could look at me funny and it hurt my feelings. And so, what I learned for me was that I would much rather you punch me in the face than hurt my feelings. And I became good at arranging situations like that. When I was a little kid, my family was very active. They still are very active in the Catholic Church. And they would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say, a boy. It wasn't as easy to do back then as it is today. But it wasn't like, some days I was saying a nurse, a teacher, like other kids might. No, I would consistently want to be a boy, and this bothered them. So they eventually took me to a priest. to talk to me about this. And the priest told my mom, because we were on welfare, that I needed to see a psychologist. And eventually, I don't remember if I think they were just maybe they were psychiatrists. I don't know what they were. I saw a bunch of professionals, not as many as lots of you have, but I saw some. I don't have any kind of diagnosis officially to give you about what those professionals thought about, why I cut my wrists all the time, or why I wanted to be a boy, or, why I hated me and you and everybody else, or anything else, because I felt about those people much like a friend of mine, Patty Hicks, always did. I thought those people should have to work for their money, and I never told them anything. I did not fill out one form. I did not answer one question. I did not play with one doll. We just sat there and looked at each other. And so I was not able to get any help from these people. And so, I guess maybe my first lesson in acceptance was recognizing I wasn't going to be able to be a boy. And so I settled for the next best thing. And the way I saw the world, the only option that I saw, it's not necessarily the only option, but it's the way I saw it. The only option was to try and be a tough broad. And I spent all my time before coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, and some of it afterwards, trying to be what I thought a tough broad was. Now in Venice Beach, because it's a beach town and it's in California, it's very important that you never wear shoes. Tough broads have tough feet. And just in case you don't know that. So I had the ability, to walk down an alley with broken glass barefoot. And this was important. I mean, we would look for areas. You purposely walk over by the glass to show, everyone that you can walk on glass. I would stand down there at the boardwalk, and there'd be touristy-looking people, and they'd look at me, and I'd look right back at them, and I'd take my cigarette, and I'd throw it down on the sidewalk, and I would put it out with my bare feet. And I'd see sometimes the touristy-looking people, they'd kind of whisper back and forth to one another, and I figured I knew what they were saying. They're saying, wow, that is one tough broad, After I'd been sober for a while, my sponsor said to me, maybe what some of those people were saying to one another was, did you see that? That person just put flesh to fire. Why would anybody do anything so stupid? But I didn't know there was another way of looking at it. In growing up in Venice, I wanted to be tough, and it was important that you be in a gang, and I was. It was important that you do a lot of fighting, and I did. It's important for me that I remember to let all of you know that I have never won a fight in my life. But I never fought less than 5 people at a time. After I'd been sober, again, my sponsor pointed out, if you fight one person and you lose, someone might think you're not a very good fighter. But if you always fight groups of 5 or more, no one expects you to win. And they think, maybe you're kind of tough, because why would that whole group have had to take you on? So it was sort of just the way that I kind of did it. I want to mention this. I'm going to jump around a little bit, but my mom came to Alcoholics Anonymous. My mom has been in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous for 44 years. My mom right now has 5 continuous years of sobriety. But my mom was to struggle, obviously, and to go in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous many times. Somehow that's just popped into my mind, and I want to mention it. We talk about in Alcoholics Anonymous that as we're sober, no matter how long we're sober, that the disease of alcoholism is continuing to progress. I think that had it not been for my mother's alcoholism, I don't think I would have really believed that. I mean, you're sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, you watch these people, you're sober for a while, and you look and they look better than they did when they walked through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. You see them 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years later, they're in better health physically. They are, usually, right? They're doing better, usually. So that you'd think, well, okay, maybe if they went back to drinking in a couple of months, things would get pretty rough if they're alcoholic. But I want to tell you a story of what I saw and watched happen in my mother's life to convince me that alcoholism is a progressive disease, even when we stay sober. My mom came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was, I don't know, I'm not sure, I think I was maybe 9 years old this particular time when she was sober. And when my mom was drinking, you know, the way that our life was we never had the gas, the phone, and the lights all on at the same time. We lived mostly in hotels, and a lot of times we came home and there was a lock on the door and you never got in there and you never got your stuff ever again, and then you just went somewhere else. And this was kind of our lifestyle. But my mom had gotten sober, and my mom was in AA, and my mom had a job, and we had an apartment. And one night on a Friday, I think, no, it must have been a weekend. My mom came home, and she was all dressed up, and my mother always got very dressed up. And she looked really beautiful, and she came home, and she said, I was at a very elegant party tonight. I said, really? Now, by the way, because I haven't really mentioned this, my mom was a bar drinker in Venice Beach. And there's some pretty rough bars, just, you know, like pool cue through the head is just kind of like once a week, you know, so that happens to somebody. It's just who was it kind of thing, you know what I mean? A lot of fighting, a lot of whatever. That's the kind of drinking my mom did and the places that she drank. So she came in this beautiful black dress, I remember it, and she had the, I don't know if you guys, you know, the mole here that you put on your, you know, high heels, you know, the whole deal. So she walked in, and she said, I was at this very elegant party tonight. And I said, oh, and she said, and I drank brandy. And I said, really, Mom? I said, I thought when you go to AA, you don't drink anymore. She said, it was brandy. Okay, what do I know? You know, I went to school the next day, and I came home, and when I walked into the apartment, there were a bunch of people passed out. My mom, a bunch of guys, there were drugs, there were a bunch of bottles all over the house. I went into the back room to go to sleep, and that night one of the guys broke in and he attacked me, and I yelled and screamed for help, but nobody woke up. And I got out of the apartment, and when I came back, my mom was waking up, and my mom introduced me to her new boyfriend, who she had met the night before in the bar, and he had just gotten out of prison that day for killing his girlfriend. And it was in 24 hours, we had gone from having the gas, the phone, and the lights on to the insanity of alcoholism, you know. Anyway, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. My mother brought me to Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't want help. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. I didn't want to join an organization that was allowing my mother to belong to it. But she was afraid if she left me alone that I might get her evicted from another apartment. So I sat in that meeting that night, and the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous began for me that night, even though I did not get sober right then. It began for me because there was a guy in that meeting that I admired more than anyone else in the entire world. And again, if you're new, you will not or you may not identify with the same things that were important to me and that made a difference to me at that meeting that day. But it's my story, so I got to share it the way that it was. If I had to tell you the one thing that I would have wanted out of life, probably the only thing that I can think of that I would have wanted out of life when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, what I'd wanted all my life, I wanted the ability to walk into a room full of strangers and have everyone there back away from me in terror. Now, when you're 87 pounds, that almost never happens, you know. But this guy sitting in the meeting that night was a drinking friend of my mother's, and he was violent and hostile. He had just gotten out of jail. He had a knife on his belt. His motorcycle was parked outside, and he was one of the most hostile and violent people that I had ever known. And I had seen him in those bars in Venice, and if he came in and he'd been drinking and he wanted to sit at your table, you gave him the table. You didn't discuss with him the fact that there were 6 empty tables that he could have. You just gave him the table if he wanted it. And I looked at this man who had achieved everything that I wanted out of life. The ability to clear a table at a tough bar in Venice Beach. And he was sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. It made a huge impression on me because I thought it was just for weak people like my mom. And I went after the meeting and he and I talked He was the only person that I really talked to in Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to meetings for about a week, and I explained to Paul that I wasn't an alcoholic, that I couldn't possibly be an alcoholic, that I wasn't anything like my mother, who we all knew was alcoholic, that I was too young to be an alcoholic, that I had places to go, people to see, things to do. I had my whole life ahead of me, and I was clearly not alcoholic. I had a lot of other things, but I was not alcoholic. And I later found out that non-alcoholics don't spend any time trying to convince other people they're not alcoholic. They already know that, you know. And Paul turned to me and he said, you know, June, I'm new in this AA thing, and they have told me I can't diagnose anybody's disease but my own. He said, but in your case, I'm going to make an exception. I've seen the way that you drink, and I've seen the way that you use chemicals, and I happen to believe if you don't come into this program and take what these people have to offer you within a period of 6 months or less, you're going to be out on the streets, you're going to be shooting stuff, and you're going to be selling your ass. And I knew he wasn't trying to scare me like a high school teacher might do about making up a story to scare the kids. He was just talking about facts. He was talking about things that had happened and were beginning to happen in my life and things that had happened in his life, and he was sharing with me, and I knew that he was telling me the truth. But I did not want to join Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't want to believe that it could be that bad. And yet in that 2-week period of time, every opportunity, every option but Alcoholics Anonymous was removed from my life. I've already kind of mentioned, but I want to just go over it one more time. By the time I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, the only person I hated more than my mother was me. And I hated everybody. I hated my mother for everything that had ever gone wrong, and take it from me, the short version, a lot had gone wrong. I hated every, person in or out of Alcoholics Anonymous. I just hated the whole world, and mostly I hated me. And I was filled with anger and rage, and my mother and I had a violent relationship. And my mother told me that time that she did not have to be subjected to violence in her home now that she was sober, and she asked me to leave, and I did. I'd been in a number of foster homes. None of them would take me back. I tried to get into a couple of alcohol recovery homes that were in the Los Angeles area at that time. There were only a couple. None of them would take me, some because of my age, some because of my attitude. There was a program back then that some of you might remember called Synanon. My mother had been sending me to some of those games and to some of those things, and they were actually recruiting for membership, and they wouldn't take me either. So things were looking kind of bad, and then I thought, you know what, who cares? Who cares about families and programs and any of that? None of that matters. If you're a tough broad, the only thing that matters is your gang. And then one day as I walked down an alley, all 5 members of my own gang beat me up. So I found myself sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was 87 pounds, I had a black eye, I had a swollen lip, I had no shoes, wouldn't have worn shoes if I'd had them. I had no one in my family that wanted anything to do with me. I had no place else to go. I had no place to stay. I had no money, and so I raised my hand in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have not had a drink or taken anything that affects me from the neck up since that time. That's how I personally define sobriety. I got very active in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous from the very beginning, and I have remained active in different ways in Alcoholics Anonymous throughout the years that I've been sober. And I am so grateful to the people that were here when I got here in Alcoholics Anonymous, and to those people that were here when I got here and who are still continuing to be active, enthusiastic members of Alcoholics Anonymous. I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I know this won't surprise you, with a bad attitude. And it wasn't that I got a bad attitude after I got sober. I simply came here with the only attitude I had ever had, and it had always been bad. I didn't like anybody. I didn't like women. I didn't want to be a woman. I didn't want to look like a woman. I didn't want to sit next to a woman. I most certainly was not going to hug women, and I did not like listening to women speakers, which always makes me feel better because I know there's never as many people listening to me as it looks like. The men that I had known were violent. They were probably mostly alcoholic. And I figured that's how you guys were identifying yourself here, and I don't want anything to do with any of you either. And I had a problem because when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, all they had were men and women, and I didn't like any of them. But I went to 21 meetings a week anyway. I got to this program, I had a very limited vocabulary. Consisted almost solely of profanity. There were a few exceptions, the, and, mother. I found a lot of people in Alcoholics Anonymous who were extremely offended by my language, and so I tried to use it more when they got near me. I did not wear shoes most of the first couple years that I was sober. I wore a motorcycle chain on my wrists and my ankle. I had a jacket, and on the back it said, "Do unto others and then split," which was pretty much my spiritual philosophy. I smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I lit all of them myself. Occasionally someone would hold a match, and I let them hold it as long as they liked, but they did not light my cigarette with it. And sometimes someone would hold a door open, and I'd let them hold it until they got tired. And when the door closed, I'd open it for myself only, and I'd go through the door. I mostly did not accept or ask for rides or any help. Did not ask for help. Couldn't. Mostly I walked. Sometimes I hitchhiked. If I had some money, I took a bus to those 21 meetings a week. It was funny, I was talking to a good, very dear friend of mine this week, Bill McLaren. He's got 42 years, and talking about my Wednesday meeting was at Las Feliz, and I lived in Venice. And I was telling Bill, I drove to Las Feliz, last year to talk, and it took me a long time just to drive, And yet I remember Wednesdays were one of my favorite days after I got sober, because it was 2 meetings. There was a 7 to 8 and an 8:30 to 10. And I would go to a noon meeting and get out at 2, and then I would walk, hitchhike, or ride a bus, and it would take me at least 3 hours until I got there at 5 to set up the chairs, but it kind of filled my day, and that's all I had going. What I want to let you know is if you choose to dress the way that I did, talk the way that I did, and smoke the way that I did, which you really can't do indoors anymore, but we could then, you too can sit in a pretty large meeting and have an entire row all to yourself. I was very good at keeping people away from me. And I'm very grateful to the people who tolerated me the way that I was when I came in. And I'm very grateful that I got involved in an active group who, as I mentioned, taught me about being, an active part of Alcoholics Anonymous. My first commitment, was at the Monday Night Venice group, and I was the literature chairperson. And I showed up every Monday to do that early and set up that. And it was just a really important commitment. It took a long time for me to feel comfortable in Alcoholics Anonymous, a long time. I think that, for me, Alcoholics Anonymous and the process that's taken place here has been very, very slow. And I'm not a person that really likes a slow answer. I found after I got into Alcoholics Anonymous that it was really painful to be sober. It was really hard. I was a person who was used to, I took something before I was going to feel anything, And I drank to not care. I drank to not feel. I drank to not get hurt, And in sobriety, it was really hard. I got my feelings hurt all the time. No one even knew that they'd done anything, But it was just that oversensitivity, and it was also the fact that I had always hated myself, always. And now I was sober and faced with this, So it was not a fast, answer here. But I want to tell you a story about something that happened for me. I was around 5 or 7 years sober. I don't remember. And I know this won't sound that good to anybody who's newer than that. But I was at the Palm Springs Roundup, which my sponsor, Gail Wilson, had been very active and had a regular commitment at. And I was at that Roundup, and someone had given me a ticket to sit at the banquet. And someone else had given me a dress to wear to the banquet. And I was sitting at my table, looking around, comparing myself to other people in the room, something I still do if I want to make myself feel bad, And I was looking around, and I saw someone, I think, wearing a black dress. And I looked at this beautiful black dress, and I thought, don't you wish you were wearing that dress? I talked to myself. I don't know about any of you guys. And I said, no, I'm glad I'm wearing this brown dress. And so I thought, what? What are you talking about? What do you mean you're glad you're wearing this brown dress? I mean, okay, green is your favorite color. So we looked around, we found a green dress. All right. Now, you see the green dress and how beautiful that is. You do wish you were wearing the green dress, right? And that, no. What are you talking about here? You know, I mean, you don't want to have, it was inconceivable to me that I wanted to be wearing the dress that I was wearing. And so I started asking myself other questions. I mean, you don't want to have straight hair? You know? I mean, you don't wish you were sitting at the fun table? You don't wish you had a different mom? You don't wish you weren't from your hometown? I started asking myself all these things. It was just unbelievable. And then I realized for the very first time in my entire life, I didn't want to feel any different than I was feeling. I didn't wish I was you. I'd always wanted to be anybody else. I didn't want to trade places with anybody. I just couldn't believe it. I'm telling you, when I walked through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, we had some very convincing members of Alcoholics Anonymous then. There wasn't one person or all of them put together that could have told me that someday, somewhere on this journey, you're going to be sitting somewhere and you're not going to want to trade places with anybody. In those early years of my sobriety, the best I hoped for was that as I happened to be walking down the street and maybe glance into one of those mirrors, those windows in a storefront where you can see a reflection, that maybe I wouldn't feel like throwing up at what I saw looking back. And that was the hope that kept me coming, that maybe Alcoholics Anonymous could accomplish that I just wouldn't hate myself that much. And here I was sitting and I didn't want to trade places with anybody. Now, I think it would make a much better AA talk if I could tell you that from that moment to this, I've never wanted anything to be different, never wanted to feel different, never wanted to be anybody, but that isn't true. But I will tell you this, that as I have walked this journey in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've had some bumps in my road. I don't know that they're any worse than anybody else's. I think some of them have been hard. I know other people in Alcoholics Anonymous who've walked through incredible situations. But I will tell you this, that it's been a very, very, very long time since I would have been willing to trade places with anybody. You know, when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I remember very clearly I was less than 30 days sober, and I went to the 2+2 meeting, and a woman named Sybil was talking. And that night, when Sybil talked, Sybil had 32 years sober. Now, I had 30 days. And Sybil was there, and she talked, and I don't remember all of what she said. But I do remember very clearly, at the end of her talk, she said, "Newcomers," she said, "if I could wave a magic wand and, give you the life that I have today that is so amazing and wonderful," she said, "and I could just give it to you," she said, "I wouldn't do it." Now, and I remember sitting there and I thought, that's just mean. Now, I'm from Venice. I know there aren't magic wands. But I thought, but she should want to. Do you know what I mean? She should want to be able to wave the magic wand. She didn't even want to. And I was there, I was homeless. I was facing court cases. I was facing deportation. I didn't have any place to live. I didn't have $1. And she doesn't even want to wave the magic wand. And then she said, "I wouldn't do it because I wouldn't want to rob you of the journey." Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I was sitting there, I thought, I don't want the journey. I don't want the journey. Just wave the wand. I don't want it. So, I'm going to jump around a little bit. When I was When I was 35 years sober, I went to Kona, Hawaii, which is a place that's been very special for me. Made a lot of friends in AA there. It's got an ocean. And I went there, and when I took my cake for 35 years, I talked about what I just said about Sybil and about how I was really glad that she hadn't robbed me of my journey. And after that meeting, a guy came up to me, and he said, you know, I heard Sybil talk once when I lived back on the mainland. And he said, you know, she read this letter that Bill Wilson wrote to her. And I thought, really? And he said, yeah. He said, you know, are you going to be at the morning meeting at the beach tomorrow? He said, I'll bring you a copy of it. And I said, yeah. Now, I lived, you know, within, well, I mean, Sybil, I think, lived in like West Covina or, you know, right by, you know, a lot of that time, and then she lived downtown. But anyway, I mean, she lived within an hour of me. And I went and sat with Bob and Sybil a number of times, heard her talk many, many times, you know, living in Los Angeles, and got to spend a lot of time with her. I never heard about a letter from Bill Wilson to Sybil. And here I am, I'm flown across, you know, the country to an island, and this guy I don't know comes up and he has a letter from Bill Wilson to Sybil. And so he brought the letter, you know, to the next morning. And I want to just, you know, I'm going to jump into Sybil's story, you know, really quick, but it had a great amount of significance to me. For those of you who are new, fairly new in Alcoholics Anonymous, Sybil was the first woman to get sober west of the Mississippi. When Sybil, she had seen a couple of articles in different magazines that came out before the Jack Alexander article talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. And she just didn't understand, as much as she didn't want to drink, how sometimes she'd just end up drunk. And her husband told her he was going to take away her daughter, and she was going to lose her daughter, and she just didn't know what to do. She couldn't understand how she kept acting like this. And she wrote a letter to the New York General Service Office asking if she could go to one of their hospitals, because she figured that must be how you get sober. And they instead wrote her a letter saying, there's a meeting in Los Angeles. You don't have to come to New York. So she got ready and she went to the meeting that night, but she was scared to go alone, so she had her husband take her. And they got to the meeting, and they stood in the little alcove of the meeting, and then after a little while, one of the guys said, okay, it's time for the meeting to start. All the women have to leave. And so she left. They actually took her husband in there. Now, back then, meetings went on as long as they wanted. And that particular meeting went a long time because her husband kept telling him he was an alcoholic. But they weren't going to buy that. So anyway, the meeting went a long time. After the meeting, he came out, and he and Sybil and he left, and Sybil went straight to a bar and got drunk. And about 2 in the morning, when the bars in LA closed, she remembered that in this letter that they'd written her from New York with the address to the meeting, they'd given her a guy's phone number. Cliff was his name. Cliff Walker. And she went outside and got the phone, and she called him. And she said, you know, I just want to let you know, next week I'm going to have your job, buddy. I'm having you fired. And I'm reporting you, you know. And he said, what, you know, he said, listen, Sybil, he said, you know, they didn't know that you were the alcoholic. We never had a woman. He goes, I was at work tonight, but I'll be there next week. You come back next week, and we're going, you know, and I'll make sure they don't throw you out of the meeting. So she came back the next week, but her husband wouldn't go back with her. And Sybil was afraid to go alone, so she went and asked her brother, Tex. And Tex was a big drinker. But Tex wouldn't drink with Sybil because she got in too much trouble. But she said, Tex, will you go to the meeting with me? I don't want to go alone. And he said, you know, this is interesting. They help people not drink. He said, I got all these guys working for me, and I'm going to tell them they either get in the truck and go to the meeting or they're fired. So Tex got his pickup truck, and he put 8 people in the back of it, and him and Sybil in the front, and they went to the meeting. Now, they showed up at the meeting with more people than were already sober in AA, you know, with the ones that Tex was bringing in. And they had the meeting. They let Sybil stay. And at the end of the meeting, the guy that was running the group they started carrying in bags, pillowcases. And this was the week that just a couple weeks after the Jack Alexander article had come out. And so the guy that was leading the meeting, he said, now we got all these letters of people who have written asking for help because they want to get sober or they've got something going on in their life with alcoholism. And so they passed out the letters. And back then, there was the only meeting in Los Angeles and people had driven like 100 miles. So they gave one of the bags to the guy that was from San Diego. And they gave one of the bags to the guy that was from San Bernardino. And they gave one of the bags to the guy who was from Bakersfield. And all of these hundreds of letters, and those were all their 12-step calls. And then at the very end, he said, now we've got one bag left. And he says, Sybil, this is all the women. I'm going to put you in charge of all the women. And she said, oh, no, that's not going to work. And he said, why not? And she said, because I'm not going to be sober. I've never stayed sober ever. And he said, well, it's okay. She said, well, I don't even know what would I tell these people. I don't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know how you guys do it. I don't know how you do anything. He said, well, here's what you're going to do. You're going to knock on the door and you're going to say, my name's Sybil. I'm an alcoholic. Did you write this letter? And then you're going to say, I don't know how they do it or what they're doing, but if you come with me, we'll go and find out together. And Sybil never drank again. Sybil died with, if I'm correct, I'm pretty sure it was over 60-some years sober. Anyway, so now I'm in Hawaii, and this guy brings me this letter. And this letter, which I should have brought actually to read to you, but I didn't, it's dated November of 1952. And Sybil had written a letter to Bill Wilson because she was having a really hard time. She was about 12 years sober. She was a very active member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and she was having a hard time in her life. And I'm just going to tell you a couple things that had happened. She was married at the time. She'd come home from a meeting, and when she came home, her husband said, you know, Sybil, we've been having some problems in our marriage, and I know what we need to do to fix it. And she said, well, that's great. What do we need to do? And he pulled out a bottle, and he poured her a drink, and he said, I like you better when you're drinking. And she packed up, and she walked out. And right around then, Tex, who was her dearest friend, her brother, got sick, and he died of cancer. And her and Tex had a business together, and it had lost everything. And so they were kind of facing bankruptcy, and then she'd lost her best friend, and her marriage was falling apart, and she'd written a letter to Bill Wilson. And I don't have her letter, but I have the one that he wrote back. And he wrote back to her, and he said, you know, Sybil, sometimes life is like a long day in school. Some of the lessons are hard, and some of the lessons are easy. But we show up, and it is by our example and the example of other people, you know, that we're able to help each other. And anyway, I read this letter, and it just, you know, it so touched my heart. It so reminded me of what's been so important to me about Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, is that it is a journey, and that along the way, I've been very fortunate to meet a lot of people in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous who've kind of helped me with my journey. You know, it's a unique opportunity for each of us to find out who we are, you know, and to get a lot of, you know, guidance along the way. I've been really, really overpaid, as Norm Alpe would say, in so many ways. So I'll tell you one other thing, you know, or one other little area thing, and then I'll go ahead and sit down. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, with a 7th grade education. I did not plan. I tried to go back to school after I got sober, and I was incapable of it. My mind wouldn't work. I couldn't get it to function, really. And so I just went to lots and lots of meetings and stayed active in service in Alcoholics Anonymous. But after I'd been sober for a while, my sponsor convinced me and made an opportunity available for me to go to school. And by then I had learned to show up, something I'd learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I showed up at school every day. And I tried to do the lesson that they asked you to every day. And I just tried the best I could. And at the end of a couple of years, actually 4 years, they announced that they called me in and they told me I'd completed all the requirements for what they called an AA college degree, which I thought was a nice name for a college degree. I'd never planned on getting a college degree. I went ahead and I took a GED at the time and, you know, got the equivalency for a high school diploma. I went ahead and filled out some more applications, and I was accepted at a university. And I went ahead and I continued to show up. and do the best I could. And I graduated from a university. And a couple of years later, I had been filling out paperwork for this dream that I had come up with, that my sponsor told me I had to do the footwork for, same as anybody in or out of Alcoholics Anonymous, same footwork. And I went ahead and I did, sent away those applications, and I received a letter. It's been over 25 years now, telling me that I had been chosen as one of 300 out of 3,000 applicants to go to law school. Now, I'll tell you, I always planned on spending a lot of time in court. But never on that side of the table. And I was able to go on, and I did attend law school. I did graduate, and it was very difficult in lots of different ways, but not as much intellectually as it was a part of that process of recognizing and healing some of where I had come from, and who I was, and just recognizing that I'm okay, Anyway, I stayed active in Alcoholics Anonymous throughout that time. I did go ahead and I finished law school, and in order to practice law, you have to pass the bar exam. In case you didn't know that. I didn't know that before. I didn't, So I went ahead and I signed up for the class, and I studied really hard, and I did all the things that you're supposed to do to pass the bar exam. And then I took the exam. It's a 3-day exam, 8 hours a day. And then after you do that, then you wait 3 or 4 months to find out how you did. So I got a letter Thanksgiving weekend of 1983, I guess it was back then, telling me that I did not pass the bar exam. I absolutely couldn't believe it. Now, I was 11 years sober, and this was the end of November, and I had enough money to pay my rent on December 1st. And that was it. I didn't have $1 to buy food. I didn't have any money to put gas in the car. I didn't have a job because I couldn't get a job based on the fact that I didn't pass this exam. And I had to speak at a meeting that night. And I can't tell you how excited I was about that. But I'd been taught to show up, and I showed up. I just wept, I think, for 45 minutes. I have no idea, And the next day, I got a 12-step call from central office, and I went and I picked up this woman, and I took her to a meeting, and then she was kind of sobering up, because, of course, she'd had to have a few drinks to go to the meeting. She was kind of sobering up, and we sat at my house, and we were, sitting there and talking, and she started kind of crying. And she said, I just don't know, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know how I'm going to stay sober. She said, I don't have enough money to pay my rent next month. And I said, neither do I. She said, but I don't have a job. I said, well, neither do I. And she said, well, I just don't know, how I'm going to make it financially. I said, neither do I. And she said, how long have you been sober? I said, well, 11 years, but most people get it a lot faster, so it's really a good program. But it's not about the money. It's not about the job. We don't drink no matter what. Anyway, I ended up taking the bar exam again, and I did get a job, and it's a job that I still have. I work part-time. It's a job I love very, very much, and it's a job I believe I'm able to be of service. And I never have a day ever that I go to work where I'm not reminded of where alcoholism takes people like me. And this particular job, after I'd worked there for about 8 or 10 years, my boss called me in one day, and he said, we'd like you to work as one of the trainers. We'd like you to train some of the new lawyers because we like your attitude. And I thought, well, let me assure you of this. When I walked through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous in July of 1972, no one thought that someday I would get a job for my attitude. I was thinking about this morning, when I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, I was 13 years old. They were guessing my age at 37. I was so old when I walked through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous that you either know what I'm talking about or you don't. I've obviously gotten older as I've stayed sober. And I've certainly had a few days, where I've wondered if I'm going to have or having a midlife crisis and all of those kind of things. But I have never for one instant felt anywhere near as old as I did when I came through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I was a few years sober and I got to know Cliff and Pat and hang out with them and their family, Cliff took me surfing. And I made him laugh with my antics, But the ocean has, continued to hold a very deep importance for me. And when I was going through a hard time 4 years ago when I walked out of a marriage that I really couldn't stay in anymore with my 3 daughters, I really felt like, I was a failure in AA. I felt like all the principles that I tried to apply just weren't working. And I really felt like I got a giant F on my report card. And it was weird in a way because, I'd never judged anybody I knew that had had a divorce or had gone through a difficult marriage. And yet for me, it was a very, very shameful, horrible time. And that was one of those things when I called Cliff, when I was sitting on the beach. And after that, the ocean was very important for me to go to and to begin to, just be there. And that whole thing with Kona, Hawaii and all of that. But I ended up about 2 years ago, I became passionate. Actually 3 years ago, I became passionate about surfing. And I cannot tell you how much that has meant for me. I think that I was thinking about it last night, and I certainly couldn't analogize, all of AA and sobriety to surfing. And yet, I thought, the thing about surfing is that you've got to go out there. You've got to paddle out if you're going to catch a wave. You can't do it by not trying and getting out there. And some days, I'm sitting on the beach and I'm scared. I'm scared to go out there. And sometimes I'm out there and I'm scared, And my mind is saying, you can't do this. You're never going to make it. You don't even know how to surf. People who surf are probably voting that you will stop coming out here. You're making it look bad. And I was thinking about it this morning. I was thinking about the circular thing of, Cliff and him taking me out there and then me finding this passion again. And thinking how so much of the years of my sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous have been a lot of you guys telling me, get back out there. You don't have to drink to start over. What a wonderful thing about Alcoholics Anonymous, I was reading something, and I'm going to sit down honestly when I say this. Bill Wilson wrote a letter to Dr. Young thanking him for his contribution to Alcoholics Anonymous, where he had told, where we talk so often about how in order to stay sober, we have to have a psychic change. Something has to happen. And Bill Wilson wrote a letter to Dr. Young saying, thank you. Thank you for passing that on. Thank you for telling us that that's what we needed to start with in order for these spiritual principles to make a change in our life. And Dr. Young wrote back and he said, I'm glad that worked for you. He said, but that's not enough. I don't believe that just having a psychic change is enough. He said, I think that it also requires a community. It's not just enough that you have the psychic change. You need to have a community. And in the book, one of my favorite passages, it says, we've shown you how we got out from under. You say, yes, I'm willing. But am I to be consigned to a life where I shall be stupid, boring, and glum, like some righteous people I see? I know I must get along without liquor, but how can I? Have you a sufficient substitute? Yes, there is a substitute, and it is vastly more than that. It is a fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous. There you will find release from care, boredom, and worry. Your imagination will be fired. Life will mean something at last. The most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. Thus, we find the fellowship, and so will you. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, we had a guy who spoke a lot named Norm Alpe. Every time I ever heard Norm talk, I wanted to join AA. And then I'd remember I already belonged, or I wouldn't have been there hearing him, you know. But what Norm would always say when he finished, is he would say, but for the grace of God, people like you, rooms like this, I could have missed it all. Thanks for not letting me.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.